There's a moment most men don't remember clearly, because it doesn't arrive like a revelation. It arrives like a quiet disappointment that keeps repeating until it finally clicks. A moment where you stop asking why something feels off and start noticing that it always feels off in the same way. That moment is when dating changes forever. Not because you got angry, not because you got hurt one last time, but because you stopped interpreting women's behavior emotionally and started interpreting it structurally. You stopped asking what she meant and started asking what consistently happens. And once that happens, confusion disappears. Let's clear something up immediately. This is not about hating women. It's not about manipulation. It's not about being cold or dominant or winning. It's about perception, about finally seeing patterns instead of stories. And once a man sees patterns, he can't unsee them. Most men are raised to personalize everything in dating. If she pulls away, it's something you did. If she loses interest, you weren't enough. If she's inconsistent, you need to try harder. If she's distant, you need to communicate better. Men are taught to internalize female behavior as feedback about their worth. That belief keeps men chasing far longer than they should. But there's a point where experience interrupts that conditioning, where repetition overrides hope, where you notice that different women, different personalities, different backgrounds still produce eerily similar dynamics. And that's when the illusion breaks. If you've ever felt like dating became easier the moment you stopped taking things personally, like the video, because that shift is exactly what we're talking about here. Subscribe if you want conversations that don't flatter your feelings but sharpen your perception. And comment clarity if you remember the moment you stopped asking why and started seeing how. Let's talk about what men eventually understand. Women don't respond to words the way men do. They respond to emotional positioning. Not what you say, but how you show up. Not what you promise, but what you tolerate. Not what you intend, but what you reinforce. Most men don't realize this early because they believe consistency creates attraction. They believe effort compounds. They believe stability is rewarded. They believe clarity makes things easier. Those beliefs aren't wrong in theory. They're just incomplete. Because attraction isn't a moral system. It's a psychological one. There was a point where I realized that the more I explained myself, the worse things got. The calmer I tried to be, the less it mattered. The more understanding I became, the less respect I felt. And that didn't make sense until it did. It wasn't that women didn't like calm men. It was that calm without boundaries reads as availability. Stability without selectivity reads as weakness. Consistency without consequence reads as permission. Once you see that, you stop performing. And when you stop performing, the dynamic flips. My friend Ethan is thoughtful, communicative, emotionally aware. He believes in talking things through, in giving chances, in showing patience. Early on, women tell him he's different, that he's refreshing, that he's safe. And then, slowly, the same pattern unfolds. Interest fades, respect softens, boundaries get tested, effort becomes one-sided. Ethan finds himself explaining his intentions, justifying his feelings, trying to restore a dynamic that felt solid at the beginning. And Ethan thinks the problem is effort. But the problem is interpretation. Ethan believes emotional labor is attractive. In reality, emotional regulation is attractive, and those are not the same thing. Women don't bond through explanations. They bond through emotional polarity, through contrast, through feeling chosen, not accommodated. When a man finally understands that, he stops over-investing in people who haven't earned it, and that's when dating changes forever. Now let me talk directly to you. If you've ever felt like the moment you cared less, things suddenly worked better, you're not imagining it. If you've noticed that when you stopped chasing clarity, people suddenly offered it, that wasn't coincidence. If you've seen women respond more when you pulled back than when you leaned in, that wasn't manipulation. That was psychology. The illusion men live under for far too long is this. That attraction is built through logic, through reassurance, through explanation, through proving. It's not. Attraction is built through emotional contrast and self-containment, and once a man understands that, he stops bleeding energy. Here's the most dangerous realization for dating culture. Women don't fall for men who understand female psychology. They respond differently to men who do. Because those men don't chase reactions. They don't negotiate desire. They don't explain boundaries. They don't plead for consistency. They observe. They choose. They disengage without drama. And that alone shifts the power dynamic. Now let's address the title head on, because some people will misunderstand it on purpose. Once men understand this, dating changes forever does not mean women are defeated. It means the illusion that men must endlessly pursue to be chosen collapses. It means men stop confusing attention with attraction. It means men stop mistaking emotional volatility for passion. And when that happens, many women feel it immediately, not consciously, nervously. Because men who stop chasing don't provide the emotional fuel that confusion feeds on. They don't escalate. They don't argue. They don't over-explain. They don't seek closure from people who aren't aligned. They simply leave. That's the cold part. Not anger, absence. And absence is louder than confrontation. If you've ever watched someone suddenly become interested the moment you emotionally stepped back, you already know this is real. If you've ever been accused of changing when all you did was stop explaining yourself, you've already crossed the threshold. Now, here's the part nobody says. Men don't become cold after learning this. They become calm. They stop arguing for understanding. They stop chasing emotional resolution. They stop asking to be chosen. They let behavior speak. And once behavior speaks clearly, dating becomes simple. Not easy. Simple. Simple doesn't mean painless, it means readable. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the specific pattern men notice that breaks the illusion permanently. The one realization that makes most dating confusion disappear almost overnight. Chapter 2. The pattern men eventually notice doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself through repetition. Through that sinking feeling where you realize you've had the same conversation with different women, using different words, and somehow ended up in the same place every time. And once you see that, dating stops feeling mysterious and starts feeling mechanical. Here's the pattern, stated plainly. Women respond less to what a man says and more to what he allows. Less to his intentions and more to his tolerance. Less to his feelings and more to his frame. Most men don't want to accept this because it feels unfair. They want effort to be rewarded. They want honesty to be enough. They want consistency to build trust automatically. And in a stable world, that would be true. But dating isn't a moral environment. It's a psychological one. Let me explain this without slogans. When a man over-explains himself, he communicates uncertainty. Not because he is uncertain, but because he's trying to manage perception. He's trying to control how he's seen. And the moment you start managing perception, you give it power over you. Women sense this immediately, not consciously, somatically. They feel when a man is anchored in himself versus anchored in their response. That difference changes everything. There was a point where I noticed that the women I treated with the most patience were the ones who respected me the least. Not because patience is unattractive, but because patience without boundaries communicates that your time is elastic. Elastic time feels disposable. And once someone feels your time is disposable, so are you. This is the moment men stop romanticizing misunderstanding. They stop telling themselves she's just confused, she just needs reassurance, she's just guarded, she just needs time. And those explanations feel compassionate, but they're often avoidance dressed up as empathy. Because the truth is simpler. Interest that requires constant maintenance isn't interest, it's consumption. Lucas is observant. He starts noticing that when he responds immediately, conversations stretch out, but never deepen. When he's always available, plans stay vague. When he fills silence, women lean back. When he creates space, they lean forward. At first, Lucas thinks he's imagining it. Then, he tests it. Not as a tactic, but as an experiment. He stops explaining. He stops chasing resolution. He stops responding to emotional bait. And something strange happens. Women either adjust or disappear, and that's the key. When a man understands this, dating changes forever because he realizes he doesn't have to force clarity. He can let behavior reveal it. Women who are interested move toward consistency when space appears. Women who are feeding on attention drift away when it stops. And for the first time, dating feels efficient. This is the realization that breaks most illusions. That clarity doesn't come from talking more. It comes from tolerating less. Men are taught to communicate everything, to talk things out, to process emotions verbally, to seek understanding, and communication matters in relationships. But attraction is not a committee meeting. You don't negotiate desire, you observe it. Let me talk directly to you now. If you've ever felt that the more you tried to fix the vibe, the worse it got, that wasn't bad luck. If you've noticed that emotional availability sometimes reduced attraction instead of increasing it, you're not broken. You just misunderstood the mechanism. Emotional availability works when there's mutual desire. When there isn't, it becomes overexposure. And overexposure kills polarity. That's why men who understand this stop trying to be understood by everyone. They start selecting who deserves access. This is where the ominous shift happens. Men stop asking, how do I make this work? They start asking, should I even be here? And that single question eliminates most dating stress. Here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. Women don't lose interest because men become boring. They lose interest when men become predictable without consequence. When everything is explained. When nothing is at stake. When there's no risk in disrespect. This isn't cruelty, it's human psychology. Value requires friction. And men who finally see this stop offering themselves at a discount. Andrew used to chase emotional resolution. Every disagreement became a discussion. Every pullback became a conversation. Every inconsistency became a chance to prove maturity. He thought this made him safe. What it actually made him was available. Once Andrew stopped chasing understanding and started enforcing standards through action, the outcomes diverged quickly. Some women accused him of changing. Some called him cold. Some suddenly became attentive. Some vanished entirely. And Andrew realized something critical. None of those reactions were his responsibility. His job wasn't to be liked. His job was to be aligned. And alignment doesn't argue, it moves. This is the point where dating stops being emotional roulette and starts being filtration. Men who understand this don't fear rejection anymore. They welcome it. Because rejection happens faster, cleaner, without drama, without confusion. They stop wasting months on situations that reveal themselves in weeks. That's the real power. Not control over women, control over time. And time is the only thing you never get back. Now here's the quiet part. Once men stop chasing emotional certainty, women feel the loss of leverage they never realized they had. Not because women are malicious, because attention had been fueling the dynamic. Remove the fuel, and the fire either stabilizes or dies. And men who see this never go back. They don't argue about mixed signals. They don't debate intentions. They don't wait for closure. They watch behavior and act accordingly. That's why dating changes forever. Because once a man understands female psychology at this level, he stops participating in confusion. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the moment men realize attraction isn't built by effort but revealed by boundaries, and why this realization makes many women uncomfortable without a single word being spoken. Chapter 3. The moment that really changes everything for men isn't when they learn how attraction works. It's when they realize attraction was never something they were supposed to build in the first place. It was something they were supposed to notice. That realization lands heavy because it reframes years of effort as misplaced energy. Not wasted in a moral sense, but misdirected. You weren't failing at dating. You were playing the wrong role. Most men are taught to be builders in relationships, builders of connection, builders of comfort, builders of momentum, builders of understanding. And that instinct works in work, in fitness, in skill, in money. Effort creates results there, so men naturally assume the same rule applies to attraction. It doesn't. Attraction isn't constructed, it's revealed, and the way it's revealed is through boundaries. Let me slow this down, because this is the point where men usually feel something snap into place. Boundaries are not rules you announce, they're standards you enforce through action. They show up in what you tolerate, what you disengage from, and what you don't explain. When a man lacks boundaries, he becomes endlessly available. When he becomes endlessly available, he removes contrast. And without contrast, attraction has nothing to lean against. This is the part men don't like at first because it sounds passive. It sounds like doing less. But what it actually requires is restraint. And restraint is harder than effort. There was a moment where I realized I wasn't tired of dating. I was tired of participating in confusion, tired of explaining why consistency mattered, tired of justifying my standards, tired of trying to make people see what they were showing me with their actions. So I stopped. Not dramatically, quietly. I stopped replying to mixed signals. I stopped engaging with vagueness. I stopped following conversations that went nowhere. And what happened next was the most revealing part. Nothing broke. There was no explosion, no confrontation, no emotional collapse. The dynamics simply resolved themselves. Women who were interested adjusted. Women who weren't drifted away. And for the first time, I wasn't confused by either outcome. That's when men understand something chilling. You don't lose women by enforcing boundaries. You lose illusions, and illusions are expensive. Interest doesn't grow from effort. It shows itself in response to space. When you remove pressure, desire either steps forward or disappears. There is no middle ground. Men who understand this stop trying to close gaps emotionally. They let gaps speak. Now let me talk directly to you. If you've ever felt anxiety when you stopped texting first, or when you didn't follow up, or when you let silence sit, that anxiety wasn't about losing her. It was about losing control over the narrative you were trying to manage. Silence removes your ability to steer perception. And that's terrifying until you realize you don't need to steer anything. Behavior tells you everything. This is where the ominous shift happens internally. Men stop needing reassurance. They stop needing confirmation. They stop asking where they stand. They stop checking temperature. They stop chasing signals. They trust observation. And observation is ruthless. It doesn't lie. It doesn't rationalize. It doesn't hope. It just shows. That's why once men understand this about women, dating changes forever. Because men stop believing words over actions. They stop confusing emotional expression with emotional investment. They stop accepting inconsistency as mystery. They call it what it is. Now let's address the part people will deliberately misunderstand. This is not about punishing women. It's about refusing to subsidize indecision. It's not about being distant. It's about being selective. It's not about playing games. It's about not participating in them. Women don't lose power when men understand female psychology. What happens is men stop giving power to confusion. And confusion thrives on engagement. Remove engagement, and clarity appears. I know a guy named Julian. Julian used to believe attraction required constant nurturing, checking in, processing, reassuring, being emotionally available at all times. When he stopped doing that, he expected relationships to collapse. Some did. Others stabilized. And that's when Julian learned the final piece. Anything that requires constant maintenance to exist was never stable to begin with. Stable attraction doesn't need babysitting. This is why men who understand this stop fearing detachment. Detachment isn't abandonment, it's discernment. They stop seeing silence as loss. They start seeing silence as information. And information is power. Not power over people, power over decisions. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about what women experience internally when men stop chasing, why this shift feels threatening even without confrontation, and why many women respond not with anger, but with confusion. Chapter 4. When men stop chasing, something subtle but unsettling happens on the other side of the dynamic. Not a collapse, not a confrontation, a vacuum. And humans are extremely sensitive to vacuums. Most women never consciously think about the role male pursuit plays in their emotional environment. It's just there. The texts, the follow-ups, the explanations, the attempts to fix the vibe, the reassurance, the effort to maintain connection, it becomes background noise, normal, expected. So when that noise stops, it doesn't register as rejection at first. It registers as disorientation. Let me be very precise here, because this is where people love to misinterpret intention. This is not about women being manipulative or malicious. This is about feedback loops. Attention creates feedback. Removal of attention removes orientation. When a man who used to lean in suddenly leans back, the woman doesn't immediately think, he's enforcing boundaries. She feels something more primitive, a shift in gravity, a loss of reference. The emotional environment feels different, and the mind rushes to explain it. That's when confusion appears. For me, I stopped trying to rescue connections that felt unstable. I didn't announce it. I didn't threaten to leave. I simply stopped filling space that wasn't being met. And the reactions were telling. Some women leaned forward. They became clearer, more intentional, more present. Not because they were losing power, but because the connection suddenly required participation. Others became irritated. They accused me of changing, of pulling away, of being distant, of not communicating. And that reaction told me everything I needed to know. Not about them as people, about the role I'd been playing. I had been the stabilizer. And once I stopped stabilizing, the system either recalibrated or collapsed. That's the cold truth men eventually learn. Emily is used to men pursuing her, not aggressively, just consistently. Texting first, following up, checking in, making plans, explaining misunderstandings, carrying emotional momentum. She dates a man named Ryan. Ryan is attentive at first, but he's also observant. When Emily starts sending mixed signals, Ryan doesn't chase clarity. He doesn't ask for reassurance. He doesn't escalate. He simply matches energy and lets space exist. Emily doesn't feel rejected. She feels unsettled. She starts replaying interactions, wondering what changed, questioning whether she misread things. And for the first time, she's aware of how much momentum had been coming from him. That awareness is uncomfortable, because it introduces a question she hasn't had to answer before. Am I actually interested, or have I just been responding? That's the psychological moment men rarely see but always trigger when they stop chasing. And here's the part that makes dating change permanently. Once a man understands that confusion often benefits from his engagement, he stops feeding it. He realizes that many dynamics don't resolve because they're meant to. They persist because someone keeps them alive. And men are usually that someone. Now let me talk directly to you. If you've ever noticed that when you stop trying to make things work, things either worked or ended quickly, that wasn't coincidence. That was filtration. Filtration is ruthless, but it's efficient. It removes ambiguity. It removes false hope. It removes prolonged anxiety, and it does so without confrontation. That's why this shift feels ominous to people who don't understand it. There's no argument, no negotiation, no emotional explosion, just a quiet withdrawal of energy. And energy is what keeps unclear dynamics alive. Let me say something that sounds harsh but is necessary. Many dating situations don't exist because of mutual desire. They exist because one person is willing to tolerate more uncertainty than the other. When that tolerance disappears, so does the situation. That's not cruelty. That's truth. Now, here's where women's internal experience often gets misread. Some women interpret this shift as emotional unavailability. They think the man is shutting down. In reality, he's opening up to a different metric. He's no longer asking, "How does she feel about me?" He's asking, "How do I feel in this dynamic?" That question flips everything. Because men are taught to endure discomfort in dating, to push through uncertainty, to prove patience, to earn clarity. And once a man stops doing that, the entire structure of the interaction changes. This is why women often say men changed out of nowhere. They didn't. Men changed internally first, and internal change always shows up as external silence before it shows up as explanation. Now let's talk about why this shift can feel threatening even when nothing hostile happens. Predictability is comforting, even when it's unhealthy, even when it's one-sided, even when it's draining. Predictability creates orientation. You know where you stand. When a man stops chasing, predictability disappears. There's no emotional map anymore. And that forces a choice: lean in or disengage. There's no middle ground. That's why once men understand this about women, dating changes forever. Because men stop allowing themselves to be the emotional scaffolding for ambiguity. They stop cushioning uncertainty. They stop absorbing inconsistency. They stop being the stabilizer for someone else's indecision. And when that happens, dynamics either evolve or end. Now let me be very clear before we move on. This is not about punishing women for indecision. It's about refusing to subsidize it. It's not about withholding affection. It's about offering it where it's reciprocated. It's not about power games. It's about self-respect. And self-respect is quiet. In the final chapter, we're going to bring this all together. We're going to talk about what this understanding actually gives men, why it doesn't make them bitter or cold, and why the men who internalize this stop arguing about dating entirely. Chapter 5. The end of this realization doesn't look dramatic. There's no mic drop, no declaration, no moment where a man announces he's figured something out. What actually happens is much quieter. He stops explaining himself, and that single change is why dating never feels the same again. When a man understands this about women, he no longer feels the need to justify his standards, translate his boundaries, or negotiate his discomfort. He doesn't argue about mixed signals. He doesn't debate intentions. He doesn't chase clarity. He doesn't ask for reassurance. He lets behavior speak, and he listens. That's the cold part people feel but can't always name. Not hostility, not resentment. Absence of overinvestment. When I noticed how peaceful my dating life became, once I stopped trying to be understood, once I stopped correcting misunderstandings, once I stopped explaining why something didn't sit right with me, I realized something uncomfortable. The women who genuinely cared didn't need explanations. The ones who didn't were using explanations as a delay tactic. And once I saw that, I never went back. That's the irreversible part of this shift. Once a man understands female psychology at this level, he no longer argues with reality. He doesn't try to talk someone into alignment. He doesn't stay where he feels confused. He doesn't romanticize inconsistency. He moves on without drama. And that's why dating changes forever. My good friend Michael used to believe that patience was proof of maturity, that staying was strength, that explaining himself was leadership, that emotional availability meant always being present. After enough cycles of the same outcome, Michael stopped interpreting dating emotionally and started interpreting it structurally. He noticed that clarity followed boundaries, that interest followed space, that respect followed consequences. So he changed one thing: he stopped chasing resolution. When something felt off, he didn't ask why. He asked whether he wanted to be in that environment. When someone pulled away, he didn't pursue. He observed. When effort wasn't reciprocated, he disengaged. And what happened surprised him. He wasn't lonely. He was lighter. Because he wasn't carrying confusion anymore. Here's the truth most people won't say out loud. Dating isn't exhausting because people are incompatible. It's exhausting because men are taught to override their intuition in favor of effort. Once that conditioning breaks, men stop bleeding energy into situations that never stabilize. Now let me talk directly to you. If you're a man watching this and something in you feels calm instead of fired up, that's a good sign. This understanding isn't supposed to make you angry. It's supposed to make you grounded. You stop seeing women as puzzles to solve. You stop seeing attraction as something to earn. You stop seeing silence as rejection. You start seeing behavior as information. And information doesn't hurt. It clarifies. If you're a woman watching this and this video made you uncomfortable, that discomfort is worth examining, not defensively, curiously. Because what men are stepping away from isn't femininity or emotion. It's confusion without accountability. Men aren't becoming cold. They're becoming selective. They're not withdrawing from love. They're withdrawing from chaos. And once a man understands that difference, he doesn't argue about dating anymore. He doesn't complain. He doesn't debate. He doesn't try to change anyone. He chooses. That's the final shift. Choice replaces pursuit. Observation replaces explanation. Calm replaces anxiety. And that's why once men understand this about women, dating changes forever. Not because women are finished, but because illusions are. If this video helped you see patterns you couldn't quite articulate before, like the video because clarity compounds, share it with someone who's still confusing effort with attraction. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns that strip dating of fantasy and replace it with understanding. I'll leave you with this. The moment a man stops chasing clarity is the moment clarity finally appears. And once that happens, there's no going back.